Are you ready to start?
Yes, we have 61 people already in the call, so I think we can make a start.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for participating in the launch of our Fair Price and Fair Pricing paper. My name is Rommel. I'm an employee of the Flemish Cancer League, and I'm also the chair of the Task Force Access to Medicines. I want to start with a few housekeeping rules. Okay. So first, if you have problems with your connection, then you should know that you can switch between phone audio and computer audio. But if you have a technical issue, maybe it's best just to send a message to Gina ECL in your chat function of Zoom. Then we also have two moments for discussion in this launch. So we will pull all the questions there. And if you want to input into the discussion, you can raise your hand, or you can also type your question into the chat. And then at the discussion moment, we will unmute your mic so that you can ask your question to the panelists. It's also important to know that the webinar is recorded and will be made available to you. And also our slides will be made available to you. Also, the webinar will be available on YouTube. A short introduction about the Access to Medicines Task Force. So the task force was established in 2016. The aim of the task force is to make cancer medicines that are safe and effective available to all cancer patients in Europe. The task force believes in the power of constructive dialogue, which means that we believe that it's necessary to dialogue with every stakeholder, the public authorities, pharmaceutical industry, researchers, patients, and healthcare professionals. Today, we represent 29 cancer societies from 25 European countries. That's over 500 million Europeans. Of course, for us, it's very important to make our voice heard, and therefore we regularly publish position papers. So we published, for example, a white paper in 2018 with a broad overview of all the challenges in the field of cancer drugs. We also recently published a paper with our view on the pharmaceutical strategy of the European Union, but today we want to talk about our fair price and fair pricing paper. Okay, so here we have these position papers about which I talked, and the last one in the row is the fair pricing paper, which is the topic of today. Now, the question is, why do we wrote this paper about fair price and fair pricing? The answer to that question is quite simple. That's because we are worried about patient access. So we see in recent decades that the price of cancer drugs has been increasing. And then of late, I think we have reached a new order of magnitude with the cell therapies and gene therapies. So I think there is a lot of room for discussion here. And so we will start the discussion right away. And I think it's very important that we first hear the view of the European Commission. And so the first speaker is Sylvain Giraud. Sylvain Giraud works at the DG Santé of the European Commission, where he is head of the unit that is responsible for quality, safety, and innovation of medical products. So before you start, Sylvain, I want to stress that it's very important that everyone sticks to the time limits so that we have time for the discussion and can also end at 11 o'clock. So Sylvain, please, you can take the floor.
Yes, thank you. So I will, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will put my slides. So I think this means that your slides are disappearing. And let me now check whether that's working. Hopefully everyone can now see this slide. So again, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this conversation. This report that you're publishing comes at an important moment as we are preparing, as you are aware, a pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which is a request that was made to our commissioner at the start of the mandate of this college by President von der Leyen, and something that we've been now working on for a few months inside DG Santé, but also with other DGs, and with a strong interest in getting input from all the various stakeholders that are interested into this policy area, and of course patient associations and associations like yours. And one of the dimensions of this policy paper we're preparing for the end of the year is affordability issues and the sustainability for the health system. So the issues that you are also dealing with in this paper. So let me start with a bit of a simple approach to this. It's been a bit the traditional way to present the challenge when we're talking about these issues. That there's of course the need for patients to access products. There is also the need to have new products, new innovative products, and to reward that innovation and to incentivize this innovation. But there is also the need for public health authorities and public authorities generally to ensure that they keep their health budget reasonable, they keep them under control, or let's say they keep them to deliver value for money, because it's not so much about how much, it's about how cost effective it is. So if this has been the sort of traditional approach, and the way it's been approached is often maybe oversimplistic, but it starts with the principle that innovation is a process that's primarily conducted by industry through industry-led R&D processes, and that it is a very costly process for this industry, and that then it needs to, in a way, public authorities have to pay the price to ensure that the innovation is rewarded properly, and that it's incentivized properly, and that the products that are innovative do actually get to the patients. So that has led to de facto monopoly situation and higher prices that are that have been considered in many cases as the necessary condition to ensure innovation and to ensure new products were being made available for patients, even if that was at the price of jeopardizing some of the financial sustainability of health systems in certain cases. So this has been a bit the overall logic of how things have been approached. But of course, this is a very simple or oversimplistic approach, because the reality is a bit different. First, we all know that the innovation process is already strongly supported by public money, and that the R&D innovation driven mechanisms are also guided and benefit a lot from public money. We also know that the innovation pipeline is determined by public health needs, but also by other considerations, and that the way the system is working, a certain number of commercial drivers are actually determining the innovation or what is labeled as innovative products into certain type of products, into certain type of niche products that are not always what the public health authorities, what the public health needs, what the so-called unmet needs would require. And sometimes it's referred to as being a market failure. We also know that the innovation process that there are sometimes some questions about the actual innovative nature of the new products in terms of their added therapeutic value. And this is becoming also a common feature of the type of questions that are coming up. So this is already some elements to try to desimplify a bit and to explain why it's a little bit more complicated than this simple approach that I described at the beginning. Second aspect is that it very often once people refer to the need for products to access patient, like if there were patients were there waiting for the products, and that they were the products that would need to access the patients, and then there were all these obstacles in between the products and the patients that the authorities would actually put to that would in a way delay access. And of course there again it's a little bit more complicated, first because and I don't need to tell you your organization that the patients also are part of a system. The patients are it's not only about a treatment. A treatment is part of a process. A treatment is part of a care organization. It's part of it. It involves health professionals. It involves public health priorities. It involves public health organization and care delivery settings. And access to medicine needs to be considered in this broader context, not just between a product and a patient. The third element of complication, I think, comes from the fact that public authorities should not be considered as obstacles in that context, because they also serve a certain number of policy objectives. They are often labeled as delaying access because they would not be willing to pay, or because they would not be willing to, or because they would be willing to request even more demonstration of cost effectiveness and so on. But these are this should be recognized as legitimate objectives from the public authorities, and the need for them to make sure that they get value for money, that they get cost-effective products, that the products that they authorize and reimburse do actually add to what already exists and correspond to what they define as public health priorities. These are very legitimate objectives from the public authorities, as is a very legitimate objective to be spending public money with value for money. And all this is even more complicated, obviously, in the EU context, because all this is operating in a regulatory and market environment where that combines an environment that combines features of an internal common market, but also strong elements that fragment that market, with differences between care organization and financing at national level, between pricing and reimbursement policy and structure, and between also market access policies, and also the size of countries makes a difference. We know that. So all this is a very well documented challenge in all this complexity. This is what we're facing. This is, as I said, one of the elements that we want to tackle in the pharma strategy that we are currently preparing. And it was referred very specifically also in the mission letter that our commissioner got at the beginning of this mandate. So in the roadmap, which is the first step in the preparation for the pharmaceutical strategy, we published this roadmap in April. We refer already to these challenges and to some of the diagnostic, in fact, in terms of unequal access to medicines that are not always affordable for patients across the EU. The existence of a certain number of market failures, high prices, lack of transparency on cost, certain effect of companies' marketing strategies and pricing mechanisms, different types of elements that lead to different situations across the EU in terms of how products get to the market, how patients have access to products, how health systems are able to cope with new products. And we also refer to the sort of pressure on public budget that has been increasing in the last few years, and also an important aspect, maybe less obvious for cancer drugs, cancer medicines, but a strong out-of-pocket element that put pressure on low-income households. This is not just about the pressure for public finance, but it can also be pressure on individual households' budgets. So what can be done to address some of these issues? Well, very broadly, and you will understand that I'm not able to go too much into detail today because we're still finalizing this document, this policy document that we will be publishing towards the end of the year, probably in November. But what can be done? Well, there are two broad types of actions. One is to propose to the member states, because a lot of these actions actually belong to national responsibilities. It's to propose to the member states to be working together further, to be cooperating more on this policy, not necessarily to have a common policy, but to be discussing their national policies and to be using maybe tools of similar natures that can help to do the national policies. It's not because you discuss your national policies with your neighbors that this becomes a common policy. You can learn from each other and still have a national policy. So that is what we want to bring further very strongly, and we will be making suggestions in the strategy. But of course, there are also other elements that are indirectly affect affordability. And they come from the overall legislative framework, and this definitely we have an EU level competence for that. So as part of the review of the legislative framework that would come one way or another from the strategy launch, we would need to also in a way mainstream some pro-competitive concerns into the revision of the legal framework, ensure that affordability, prices competition, and some of the elements that in the current system are making are creating high prices or inaffordability, or the lack of focus on or lack of transparency on costs and so on. We would need to address that as part of this a revision of the legal framework, or let's say at least a review of the current framework. So just a few ideas of possible way forwards in terms of cooperation. I mentioned that before. So there are issues in relation to the transparency of R&D costs. There are issues in relation to better evaluation of the cost effectiveness, and then you know that one key instrument that the Commission has proposed is to strengthen the EU cooperation on HTA, and we're still waiting for the member states to be following up on this proposal that is also very strongly supported by the European Parliament. But we hope the member states will be willing to further work together, because we believe that this is a very important instrument. Again, not to have necessarily a common EU policy, but to use common tools to develop national policies. And the same model can apply to many other areas where we believe member states could be working together on new model of payments and pricing. They could be working together to generate more cooperation between the different steps of market access in terms of the authorization, the HTA and cost effectiveness assessment, and the pricing and reimbursement decisions, so that there is a more linear process rather than a succession of individual decision-making steps. They could be working together also on developing better procurement practices. They could be working together also on some of the use of medicines in the hospital context, where price increase has been particularly strong. What we want to do from the Commission is to provide the member states with tools, with data, with information, with a framework where they can work together. And we want to build, of course, on some of the existing cooperation that have been starting in different settings between small numbers of member states in the last few years, with the idea that we can bring that forward. We can support also, including through financial support, some of these actions, so that there is a possibility for member states to join forces on some of these issues. So this is where I stop. I hope I wasn't too long, and I am of course happy to answer question later.
Thank you, Sylvain, for your interesting presentation, and for sharing the views of the European Commission on this. Then we go to the next speaker, and the next speaker is Lone Bilde. She is the senior project leader of Danish Cancer Society Research Center, and she's the main author of the paper on fair pricing. So I'm very much looking forward to hear her views on the matter. Lone, you have the floor. I think you're still on mute.
Lone, you're muted.
On mute, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me speak here at this webinar. As you saw the front page of our paper initially when Ward was speaking, and this paper is actually quite comprehensive because it touches upon various aspects of pharmaceutical pricing, both relating to the pros and cons of different pricing strategies. It describes the process from early discovery over product development to actual patient access, and how pricing sort of is an integrated part of this process. And it also describes potential solutions to fairer prices of cancer drugs and the roles of different stakeholders involved. So I will focus on our definition. Yes, you can see it now. So I'll just start by the definition first, where we, the ECL Task Force on Access to Medicines, believes that a fair price is justifiable, predictable, and cost-effective within the aims and priorities of the healthcare systems and the available budget. And at the same time, we believe that a fair pricing policy that takes into account the ethical and financial dimensions of patients' access to care, affordability and sustainability of healthcare systems should be encouraged and rewarded. So I'm briefly telling you about why do we have this definition of a fair price and how should it actually be interpreted and understood. So why this definition? I think Sylvain was already talking a little bit about this, but I think we all know that in healthcare, we don't have a perfect market where the price is set as a result of supply and demand forces. We know that there is market failure in healthcare. This is mainly because of a lot of asymmetry of information and intransparency, where some stakeholders know more about what's going on than others. This is a general feature of the healthcare services market. And also within healthcare, we have a certain inelasticity of demand, meaning that with price increases, demand doesn't change. So this means that the market doesn't work perfectly. Yes, and as Ward was mentioning initially, we are very worried because we see that the global expenditure on cancer medicines grows at higher rates than the incidence of cancer. And there is a certain threat to the sustainability of healthcare systems, especially with a lot of new innovations coming into the market. So we believe we need to do something to get a better approach to pricing and more fair prices. Already in Europe, we have a great disparity in the availability and access to different cancer therapies. So there's a need for action here. Especially within cancer medicines, we see a certain dilemma. On the one hand, there's a high unmet treatment need. We have a lot of, not only one disease, but a lot of cancer disease. Some of them are very rare. And some of them are more common, but we have a high unmet treatment need and a lot of hopes for a cure, actually. And we also luckily see that there's a great interest in actually innovating in this area. We have a quick innovation pace, and we also foresee a great pipeline in the years to come. And we have the possibility of fast-track regulatory processes at the EMA. And pharmaceutical companies enjoy protection of intellectual property to protect their innovation and to protect their price in the first years after they put it to market. And on the other hand, we also see that marketing authorization is usually very often based on phase 2 trials, which means that trials are based on very small patient populations, and the endpoints and the effect sizes, endpoints may be surrogate and effect sizes may not be big enough to be clinical and meaningful. So this means that when the medicines reach the markets, the various markets in Europe, they often do so without sufficient documentation of a relevant effect. There are several studies on this, and we have included some of them in our paper. And also, often the link between the very high per patient price and the incremental clinical benefit is often not established. At least Furkinger couldn't find a correlation between the high price and the incremental benefit in very many cases. When we're talking about different pricing strategies, there is a cost-based strategy where, for instance, a price would reflect the cost of bringing the product to market plus a certain markup for profit, or it could reflect the value that it brings to patients in a value-based pricing. But what we see within cancer care is mainly, in our view, is what will the market bear pricing. And we believe that it's reasonable to expect that there should be some changes to this. So mainly, how about fair prices? What is it? It should always be justified so that health systems can actually get information to answer the fundamental questions within their health system. Mainly, health system aims to ensure as much population health and absence of disease as possible within the budget. And also, of course, ensure that the whole population and not just some of the part of the population has access to sufficient and timely healthcare of a sufficient quality. So how do payers try to meet this aim? First of all, there are some fundamental questions that when they decide to introduce new technologies, new drugs in their markets, they have some questions that should be answered. Can this technology, can this drug actually meet the unmet need in this patient population? And can we get it quickly? As we already heard, there is an accelerated regulatory program within cancer care. A very fundamental care is it really worth it? Does it provide value for money? And for this, evidence-based medicine is used, and there are in Europe several concepts. It's not only a question about local country payers, national payers, it's also often regional payers and so forth, insurance companies, sickness funds, etc. And a very last question, and becoming crucially important, is can we afford it? What is the budget impact in short and long term of investing in this drug? There are several strategies. We have touched upon a lot of them in the paper. I can mention cost containment could be one, price control could be another, and setting thresholds for willingness to pay could be a third. So what do we think there is a need for at the payer level? First of all, we believe that there is a need for common and more transparent decision criteria and also evaluation concepts. We already heard Sylvain stating that they will support an enhanced European collaboration in the health technology assessment area. And we believe that fundamentally prices should reflect the value that the drug will bring to the patient. It could be in the form of cost effectiveness. It could be in the form of other value outcomes. And also, when we're talking about cost effectiveness, it may be that there is a threshold for the willingness to pay for an incremental life year gain. How much will we pay for that? Some countries have thresholds, some countries don't. But even with thresholds, there is a certain dilemma between the cost effectiveness and affordability, because it may be that the drug is cost effective and still we cannot afford to pay for all the patients in that population. And also we need a better justification and transparency of prices and the enhanced international collaboration. Yes. So let's see. How about the pharmaceutical industry, who is also a very important stakeholder in this? The industry has many stakeholders, but of course the shareholders are key. And by nature, private companies are profit maximizing unless they're foundations, but usually the majority are profit maximizing. But also companies, they aim to satisfy needs in their ever-changing markets, and they do respond to market changes. So they do respond to regulation, they do respond to changed incentives and to increase competition. But also in the industry, there's a lot of confidentiality and a lot of secrecy. This is mainly because companies need to protect their innovations and their competitive intelligence. So when we're talking about what could the industry do, of course, we believe that the industry should keep focusing on innovating for cancer patients, but we would also encourage the industry to assume a co-responsibility for short and long-term sustainability in healthcare, economic sustainability in this context. And we would also encourage the industry to work on providing more transparency on both costs and on prices. As I said before, we know that there might be a dilemma between the confidentiality surrounding companies and the need for more transparency. So our question is, how can this actually be incentivized? Yeah. So what we would like is a fair price which is justifiable, predictable, and cost effective within the aims and priorities of the healthcare systems and the available budget. And a fair pricing policy that takes into account the ethical and financial dimensions of patients' access to care, affordability, and sustainable of healthcare systems should be encouraged and rewarded. So when we say justifiable, a fair price is justifiable, we mean that the price should reflect the documented and clinically relevant benefit of the medicine and a reasonable relationship between the cost of bringing the product to market and the price. When we talk about a price should be predictable, it relates to the need for healthcare payers, policymakers, and systems to be able to predict the total cost of investing in the treatment. And cost effectiveness could be a common criterion for evaluating whether the price seems justifiable, as it links benefits with cost in a systematic way, and it provides a comparable decision-making tool across healthcare interventions. And finally, the dilemma, of course, is that there is a need to address affordability as well, especially with regard to the financial side of the sustainability of health systems. So, as we've already mentioned, a prerequisite for obtaining fairer prices is a higher level of transparency and access to information. This is both with regard to end user prices, this is with regard to documentation of product value and the cost of developing and bringing the pharmaceutical product to market. But it's also regarding reimbursement decision-making process. So of course, this is the definition, and there is an ethical dimension to it, where we believe that basically a fair price should be justifiable and should be documented so that payers can ask their fundamental questions, can answer their fundamental questions and make decisions and get a more efficient healthcare system for the benefit of the patients. But we also believe, or we also know, that there are a lot of both technical, conceptual, and organizational challenges to this and this is what we believe should be worked on in the time to come. So I think that's all for me.
Thank you, Lone, for summarizing the paper in such a clear and concise way. So now we go to the reflection of the stakeholders on our definition of fair price and fair pricing. We have 3 stakeholders who will give their reflection in, they will try to do that in 3 minutes of time. So first we go to Simone Boselli of EURORDIS, which is the Rare Diseases Organization of Europe. So Simone, can you give your view on our definition?
Thank you very much. That's much appreciated invitation to this panel. I would like to congratulate ECL and the Access to Medicine Task Force for bringing together a well-written and well-argumented piece of work, which is pretty timely. And I must say that I was pretty happy as well to see the mention and paragraph in terms of the other stakeholders' views of our paper from 2018, Breaking the Access Deadlock to Leave No One Behind, which addressed the fundamental problem that we see as community of rare patients, a system that systematically fails patients for no particular, without blaming anyone in particular. What the end product is that people with rare diseases, a third of them wait for years to receive the treatment that is already available. We see massive delays and inequalities across Europe in terms of when a medicine is available, if it is available, and if it is affordable. Thus, you guys bringing together what I believe is a much more workable and more precise definition of what fair pricing is very welcome. The key issues is that it is not easy to define what fair is. My daughters would argue endlessly about what fair is, and ending up always being right about what fair is to them. And that's the fundamental point that we see here, and it applies really also about value. Value is a relative, as much as is fair, is a relative concept, and value can bring different opportunities and challenges to each of the stakeholders that have been identified. What will bring value and fairness to us as rare disease patients, and here I include also the rare cancers that have been mentioned before, is that we need to act on 2 main axes. One is the speed of development, as we see that the greatest majority of rare diseases does not have a centrally approved, transformative, not to go into curative treatment. And therefore we need to still incentivize and address the research where these great unmet needs are. And on the other axis, we need to improve the speed of availability and accessibility of those therapies that are already existing. We see major differences between countries and between patient disease areas as well. And this is reflected in your paper too. So this is the point that we already have looked at in 2018 in our reflection paper too. And we came to similar conclusion that to construct a fair price, or a price that is fair to everyone, we need to have a mutually constructive conversation between all of the stakeholders involved, but we need to base it on something. And here, the elements that you have included, particularly around the fair price that is justifiable, that is cost effective, are a good common point to start the reflection further. I would also address the fact that one of the key points that is creating mistrust between key stakeholders, such as the pharmaceutical industry and policymakers / payers, is the asymmetry of information. To respond to that, and I think you have hinted it to in different ways into the paper, is to create more collaboration, certainly from the member states. And for this reason, already in 2015 and 2018, we reiterated the call for the construction of a European table of negotiation, whereby competent authorities will gather around the table to discuss the specifics of the different treatments, discuss all of the other issues that you are included, what is affordable, what is coming down the pipeline, what conditions should we address, and what are the affordability challenges that we have. Because in rare diseases, as you well probably imagine, the successful strategies are those that are done at supranational level and when forces are joined. And particularly in this case, I'm very happy that also Sylvain hinted at some of the points that the pharmaceutical strategy would look at, is procurement, new procurement methods. Particularly, we see that with small population and with some of the therapies that are coming down the pipeline that are bringing much hope to people with rare diseases, such as cell and gene therapies, those will come with intrinsic challenges, particularly about presence in few centers across Europe, and thus collaboration based on existing regulation and directives should be of primary importance. The other point that I would like to stress is that to reduce and make new therapies available, the patient input is fundamental, and it has to be structured throughout the life cycle of the product. Because if it is structured, for example, through in the clinical development phase, through what we call community advisory board, we can provide adequate input to innovators, be them the large pharmaceutical company, biotech, or academia, the right points for improving the situation for specific diseases. And that goes all the way down to the post-authorization phase. In regulatory with MEA, we are pretty well set, but in HTA and in pricing and reimbursement, we are not there yet. And certainly we need to work around this area. Therefore, I would like to congratulate you for this, this piece of work, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us, Simone. And then we go to Anne Hendrickx. Anne works for Solidaris, a Belgian mutual sick fund, and she's also a member of the Pharmaceutical Working Group of the International Association of Mutual Benefit Societies. Anne, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. I totally agree with the definition of fair price given by ECL. I think all the key components of a good definition are there. And still, I would like to raise 4 points. A first point is, I think we should add a scope to this fair price definition. I believe fair price can only and should only be achieved at region level. For us at a European level, and there is no sense to talk about national fair pricing. My second point is that in the definition you rightly state that there should be a link between the costs and the fair price, and I believe this is very central in any fair price definition. You have explained clearly, Leon, that this value-based pricing that we are using everywhere at the moment is leading to totally abusive profits, because there is no link between the cost and the price. And as long as we will use these emotional criteria to decide on reimbursement, like how much are we ready to pay for our life, there is no way we can be strong in negotiation. So I believe that we really need objective criteria, and costs, production, research costs clearly are objective criteria that can help us coming back to reasonable profit levels. About predictability that you are mentioning in the definition, predictability, of course, for health system is important, but I think it's also very important for the industry, because what we want to reach with a fair price is that companies would change their existing strategy of very high prices for very small population in wealthy country to fair, affordable prices targeting much broader populations. And if we want them to join in that switch, we need to give them clear perspectives. This is why at AIM we have developed a model, a calculation model of a price for a new coming medicine that uses very clear components, very objective components, the target population, the cost, the hard endpoints, and that gives a clear perspective of a price for the companies. For example, we did our model on some frequent cancer drugs, and none of these drugs would be above 7,000 euro for a treatment, which is way below what we pay today. And my last point is about transparency. We all agree that this is very important and that we have to improve transparency, but I think we can go really further than just try to get transparency. We can develop models where we don't depend on transparency. In our model, AIM's model for fair price, for instance, we propose to use our own figures if the companies are not willing or not able to give full transparency. For instance, for the cost of research, we would give a lump sum of 250 million, supposed to cover all the cost of research, unless the company is able and willing to totally open its book and to prove that it spent more on that research. Last point linked also to transparency. Of course, we would really like to know what are the net prices everywhere for every product, but I think it's really wishful thinking. But I think in a fair price and for new prices, we could really include transparent prices as a component of the fair price. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And then we go to the third stakeholder, and that's Allison Colbert. And Allison is Technical Officer of the Essential Medicines and Health Products Division of the World Health Organization. Allison.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me, and to the European Cancer Leagues for carrying forward this important topic. We definitely applaud the initiative to pursue fair pricing and access to cancer medicines, and the real practical recommendations that come through in the paper for further stakeholder work and development of tools that can make this urgent need a reality. My focus at WHO headquarters is global, and I see we have colleagues on the call that are focused on the European region, which of course is broader than the EU, but I think the way the paper documents even the disparities even within the EU, I think is quite striking and quite comprehensive in laying out the issue and its implications for access to cancer care. For us, broader than just cancer on the access to medicines front, what we find is that central to the concept of fair pricing is how we strike the balance between the public health needs for innovation and affordability, which obviously is a key concept for the cancer community. And as noted in the paper, the inherent uncertainty of value that comes with a push for rapid access. And while this almost goes without saying to a European audience, as WHO, I always need to emphasize that quality health products are imperative and that sustainable production does come at a cost. So there are several WHO initiatives that are mentioned in the paper that help member states and other stakeholders in attaining this balance, including the Fair Pricing Forum, where we bring stakeholders together to discuss this concept of access to health products and fairness. A technical report from a couple years ago that we were asked to produce on pricing of cancer medicines, as well as a recent initiative last year, a new mandate we've been given by our member states around transparency of markets for health products. Some other initiatives, just to make sure you're aware, we do have two working groups helping to prepare for next year's Fair Pricing Forum that focus on the one hand on health system ability to pay, and on the other on how we have these incentives for innovation. We also have we're launching later on this autumn a revision to the WHO guideline on country pharmaceutical pricing policies. We have an application-based MedMon system that helps countries do rapid practical snapshots on availability and affordability in practice. And then our work on pricing and affordability is in the context of a broader access initiative. So I thought it was really interesting. Sylvain noting earlier some of the concepts, for us around local production, adoption of generic and biosimilar products, cost-effective procurement, selection, quality assurance, supply chain management. These all sort of link together to ensure affordable and rapid access. So in conclusion, the Access to Medicine Task Force is very courageous in putting forward a proposed definition of fair pricing. As referenced in the paper, WHO did conduct a consultation last year with a view to refining our own definition. But what we found in doing that is, while these concepts that ECL does pull out on justifiable, predictable, cost-effective, affordable, ethical, are certainly central tenets. What we're finding is that venues like the Fair Pricing Forum are really where we want to pull out what fairness means in practice and how we can work together as stakeholders to achieve it and enable the transparency toward the right data and further collaborate. So I think initiatives such as this one are really going to help us build upon what fairness means in practice. And we look forward to taking this forward with member states and all stakeholders, the European Cancer Leagues, and many of the panelists and participants on the call. So thank you and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have some common ground there, and it would be interesting to explore how we can further collaborate on this topic. So now we have some 10 minutes for questions to the panelists and to the people who gave a presentation. So I see that there is one person already who wants to ask a question, which is Patrick Ooms of the Dutch Cancer Society. Can you unmute the mic of Patrick?
Well, I can.
Unmute.
I can hear you, Patrick.
Thank you. Ward.
Hello, Patrick. What is your question?
Okay. Thank you, Ward. Well, as you said, my name is Patrick Ooms, and I'm the lead for the Access to Medicine within the Dutch Cancer Society. And let me first start by giving you a very big compliment. I think that we are on the crossroads on how we want the pharmaceutical market in the EU, how it should look like. And this discussion helps us to choose the right road forward. And I do have a question and a follow-up question. Lorna talked about justifiable pricing. And my question is, does justifiable pricing mean that the price could increase or decrease as soon as there is a change in clinical outcome? And the follow-up question is then, who would regulate this market? And then a second follow-up question would be, and that's also what Anne mentioned, is, and on which level are we going to regulate this market, this so-called market?
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Lone, do you want to answer that?
I can try. Well, you asked if a price could increase if it was justified by a better outcome, and my answer to that is yes, provided that the issue around affordability is also addressed by the payer. So it's yeah. So the answer is yes to this, and who would regulate and on which level? I think we believe that we need a higher level regulation in this area and also collaboration. It's probably more efficient if we bring together the skills on a European level to actually be able to interpret clinical data, etc., and also to help pharmaceutical companies so that they don't need to address hundreds of payers, but maybe less. That could be an answer, I hope.
Okay, and is there someone else of the panelists or the speakers who wants to say something about it? I think Anne wants to say something.
I can't find the end.
Yeah.
If we go for some European price, we can really centralize the information that we need, because as we mentioned, we need information at least about the costs and better information about the endpoints. And that could be, for instance, part of the EMA file. That could be a new compulsory data that would be required at EMA file, and that if a new drug doesn't provide this information, it doesn't get access to the market. So the regulation, I mean, that's quite a big change. That's quite a heavy weapon, but the regulation could be quite simple.
Okay, thank you. Then we can go to the next question, I think. That's a question of Lydie Meheus of the Anti-Cancer Fund.
Hello?
Hello, Lydie.
Do you hear me?
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to, first of all, thank you for this very interesting debate. And I just would like to illustrate in what Hendrix had said about the importance of keeping the link between the cost and then the price, because we are now dealing with a very extreme example where we have products based on adenoviral vectors that are used in gene therapy. And there we have the example of Zolgensma, that you may be familiar with, for spinal muscular atrophy, a very rare disease. And the price asked by the company is 2 million. And we have actually the same product, adenoviral vectors, are used now for vaccines for COVID-19. AstraZeneca is based on adenoviral vectors, so is J&J, their vaccine product. And there we are talking about a price of $2. So there we see that it's a difference between an iPhone 7 and an iPhone 10. So where does the price difference come from? Of course, the clinical trials, and there's a lot of other ongoing arguments, but I think it's a good example of the importance of keeping the price of good, the cost of goods in the total equation of a price setting.
Yeah, I think, well, our definition also takes this into account. We mentioned the fact that we have to take value into account, but also that there should be a link with the cost of developing and bringing a drug to the market. Is there someone who wants to react to this question or this remark?
It's Simone here. I found it's a little bit, I'm sorry to say, but it's a little bit harder than this. I mean, when we look at the adenovirus vector, and that's what we are looking at, the vector. That's the delivery method in this sense, and we need to also, that's a part of it. In COVID-19, the other part of it would be what the market would be in the case of potential vaccine for total coverage of the entire world population. There is a difference to be made. There are less than 300 babies born with SMA in Europe per year. That is the difference that we're looking at. Certainly, 2 million euros per treatment as a listed price is outrageous in the way that we Europeans see it. Is that the price that is going to be finally paid by payers? We know that is not. But that price then does set a precedent. We know for sure that there was another therapy, well, you can see it, there was another gene therapy coming straight after Zolgensma was announced in the US. We knew, and it was presented in many different situations, that was going to cost around 900,000, 1 million, and suddenly it became 1.5 million. That's because the bar was set much higher. Here, we talk about the single individual price. We don't talk about the component, and that's not just the manufacturing of it, but everything else that rests behind. For example, newborn screening. Newborn screening will bring additional cost and efforts, particularly in SMA, because if it is done at an early stage, there is data available that will change the life of many babies in Europe. That's all to consider. The number, we can consider it very high.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one last question before we go to the next presentation. And so Katie Gallagher of the European Patient Forum can ask the last question. Katie. Is Katie unmuted?
Yes, hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
All right, sorry. Thanks for giving me the floor. Thanks to all the panelists. And I just want to say on behalf of EPF, we really wanted to congratulate ECL and the task force on this really comprehensive and well-argumented paper. We really welcome the precise definition of what a fair price is, which is indeed a very good basis for a multi-stakeholder dialogue, which EPF actually calls for in its recently published Value and Pricing of Innovative Medicines paper, which you kindly reference in your document. In addition, I just wanted to mention that I couldn't agree more with Simone's remarks from his initial intervention. Patients' views should be really at the heart of every assessment to ensure for accurate assessment of the pricing and value of innovation. This is definitely something that EPF and patient organizations can bring to the floor. Today, patients' views are really still insufficiently accounted for, and therefore more effort, we believe, relating to the patient involvement on this is absolutely crucial. Investment is really needed in frameworks, in structures and methodologies for meaningfully incorporating patients at all stages, some things that Sylvain might have touched upon in his intervention, from setting research priorities to clinical research, regulatory assessment, health technology assessments, and pricing and reimbursement decision at the end. So we really hope that the Commission's proposal on the pharmaceutical strategy will address this factor of systematic patient involvement in this area of work. So congratulations once again, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue with you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And I think we can agree about the importance of patient involvement in every stage of development and bringing drugs to the market and to the clinic. Then we can go to the next speaker, and the next speaker is Anna Prokupkova. She's the Advocacy and Project Manager of the Association of European Cancer Leagues, and she's going to talk about the road to the fair price and fair pricing. So she's going to talk about our recommendations for decision makers and pharmaceutical industry. Anna, can you share your thoughts with us?
Yes, hello. I hope you can all hear me well and see my slides. Let me just put it on. Good. So thank you so much, first of all, to everyone who's attending this webinar, either in Zoom or YouTube. Thank you, Var, for the introductions. And of course, Lone, for doing the hard part of covering the reasonings behind our fair price definitions. My job here is just to draw a little bit the road, or how do we actually get there? Because we know that the fair price of products, how we interpret it, is not going to happen overnight. So therefore, we felt like there should be some recommendations, both for decision maker, but also for the industry, because they're very important in this debate, on how can we sort of strive toward fairer pricing and more affordability. So before I start the presentation, just a hint, we will do a Slido. I will just launch the poll now as well. So you can already log in using slido.com, the hashtag fair price for meds. And there will be two questions. So one, we will be voting on the set of recommendations for decision makers, and then I will switch to the one for the pharma industry. So we will come back to this at the end of my presentation. So what I will actually cover, as I said, is the set we recommended for the decision makers and the different levels of governance. Then 6 recommendations for the pharmaceutical industry, but we also know that sort of dealing with fair prices and affordability is only one piece of the puzzle. So if you want to know more about what does the task force think generally about other issues throughout the entire medicines pathway, we've covered it quite comprehensively in our paper that we launched like 2 weeks ago, or a week ago actually, on the EU pharma strategy. So you can also reflect on that. And this is just like to put it a bit more into perspective, that of course we can't just solve prices, but the entire pathway. So without further ado, looking at what we're recommending to decision makers. So first of all, we think that we should, of course, not reinvent the wheel. There was many things already mentioned. Allison mentioned already the WHO initiatives, such as we have the technical report, which is quite comprehensive, with that provides recommendations to the governments as well. We have the transparency resolution from last year. We have the Dutch conclusions of the presidency from 2016, the access paper from the parliament from 2017. So there's a lot of political documents. There is also a lot of initiatives, such as the European Joint Action on Sharing Prices, which we think is a bit underused. So it could be expanded to other things than list prices of medicines. So we definitely do have the to-do lists. We do have the tools, even though some should be elaborated, but of course we should build on these blocks further. Then already this was mentioned by several people before me, including Sylvain, and we are really happy that the Commission is really willing to support also the regional initiatives on horizon scanning, HTA, and pricing and reimbursement, and those Valetas, Beneluxas, and you name it. So, and of course, I would like to underline that we strongly support the proposal of the European Commission to the European HTA collaboration. We think it's excellent, and we really call on the member states to resolve the stalemate at the European Council that is going on right now, and move ahead with the file, because this is absolutely crucial to know and to advise the member states what is cost effective. Of course, Lorna mentioned this as well in the price components. We talked a lot about what is ethical, and like this could also be sort of incentivized by, not only as we do now, we are punishing unethical behavior, such as price collusions or pay for delay deals to obstruct competition and so on. But we can also maybe look at how can we avoid actually the firms that are the outliers and that might be more willing, for instance, to share more data. How can they be somehow get some better positions toward in the negotiations? So this is something that we could also look on the positives and how to motivate the industry to actually be the ones who change first. Then, of course, we have talked about how the patent structure also affects the price. And we know that some of the either incentives or the patent structure can cause as a side effect unaffordability of some products. And we have now the big technical report from Technopolis on the orphan medicine. So we should do these reviews throughout the entire IP pathway. We should learn from the side effects. We should try to tackle them when we review the legislation, just to make sure it doesn't lead to the lack of competition and monopolistic prices, and to make sure that it doesn't cause access issues for patients. While also securing that we do want to, of course, encourage innovation, especially in the rare and underfunded disease areas. Then talking about public funds and subsidies, name it, whether it's tax breaks or collaborations with publicly funded entities or ECL's members, a lot of them fund research as well. It's all comes from public donations. We think that especially with the big grants such as Horizon Europe or the IMI initiative, or now the Innovative Health initiatives and these public-private partnerships, we think that there should be conditionalities linked to these programs. So if you have a product that results from publicly funded research, which we know that especially at the beginning, that is often the case, we would like to see this component of also reflected in the final equation and in the final price. And Lone said this as well. So this is just like, we need to also ensure that we know that we are at the point where health systems cannot afford absolutely everything that comes to the market. So in order to build more public trust, we also need to, as the public, we also would like to see what are the criteria, why is the health decision making going on the way it's going? What are the priorities? Like, where is the unmet need? Why are we reimbursing product A over product B? Is it based on clinical evidence? Is it because of the unmet need? So we really need to be more transparent about this. Of course, this is a wish rather than concrete recommendations. We think that current files, be it the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, be it the EU Pharmaceutical Strategy, we absolutely need to not shy away from the elephant in the room, that is the high prices. We need to acknowledge this is a problem. We need to acknowledge that all of us need to work on this together. And so we would like to see this topic as one of the key points within both of these files, but also in the upcoming pharmaceutical legislation that might be reopened, and other files. Even we saw this also mentioned in the debate now about shortages at the European Parliament, which is quite good. So we would be happy to mainstream this issue into all the relevant files, of course. So this is the bit where we talk about what decision makers should do. I would be quite pessimistic that we can achieve anything without the industry on board. So of course, that's why we also included 6 recommendations for the pharmaceutical industry. because they are very, very important in this debate. And without their self-reflection and maybe some changes within the current functioning of the market access pathway, we will not be able to achieve sustainable access for patients for the future generations, be it cancer or other disease areas. So I will look at what we're recommending here. So first of all, we know that all companies have the corporate social responsibility programs, and these could look at different aspects, including, for instance, the environment. But we think that we can also add an aspect about the health system sustainability and patient access. So this can be also a part of the corporate social responsibility. Also applying high degree of cost consciousness throughout the pathway. We know that in the development from early R&D throughout trials, there is quite high cost consciousness of pharmaceutical companies, but is it really high when it comes to the later stages, such as the marketing, conferences, travels, and all these other extras that also are, of course, reflected in the cost of the firms? So could be also looked into. Of course, our recommendations would be, please be transparent about the cost. How much did you pay for R&D, for clinical trials? So this is also a wish. We know that there is a lot of reluctance, but if we want to reflect our definition that we said, we think that transparency does build trust, and especially this is needed, Simone mentioned it in the beginning, between the pharmaceutical industry and the public authorities. So the more transparency would be definitely helpful and would enable better decision making as well. Of course, another thing, so this was to demonstrate sort of the relationship with the costs. This one is more to demonstrate the relationship with the value. We would need more comparative evidence. How is it better to the standard of care and to the existing therapies? So already in the early stage of development, to include these considerations. So what are the questions that the HTA bodies and payers are going to ask when I'm marketing my product? So it's very important to think about this very early on, not only about getting to the market, but getting reimbursed as well, and ultimately getting to the patients. This goes back to, yes, we do want to see the ethical component in the price reflected. So that was already mentioned. And last but not least, definitely focusing, we've also had this mentioned at the beginning by Sylvain, so I don't want to repeat everything, but yes, there is a lot of products. Are they in the areas where the public needs them? Not necessarily. There is also a lot of new products in areas that there is a lot of funding going on, and some cancer indications are part of this, of course. So we do need better communication between the patients, between the health authorities, between healthcare professionals on where the unmet need is, how can we steer the innovation, private and public, in these areas. So that is it from my end on what did we recommend. So now I would like to invite you to go to slido.com. And before we move to our distinguished speakers that will reflect on the recommendations, and then before we open the discussion, let's see what people say. So I will just share a different screen. We already have 16 people that voted, so I will share the results here. So I will give you more time to go on Slido.
Oh, no, it's 10 to 11, maybe.
Yeah, I'll
go to the next speaker on the
yes, we will do this very quick. So yeah, most people think that the transparent decision-making criteria are key, and then conditionalities to public R&D and enhanced collaboration. So this would be the top. So far, only 26 people, 27. I will wait. I'll wait for a little bit more votes, and then we can move on. All right, we have a second, so we will do it very quickly on from the pharmaceutical industry. Which components do you think are most important? I hope that you can access it. Oh, sweet. So we will wait for a minute. Bart is very good timekeeper, so he's whipping me to stop. So I'll wait.
Maybe we can come back to it in the end.
Actually, we can come back to this in the end, and we can already. You can keep voting on this, and we can move to the reflections. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, for being so concise. Then I'd like to give the word to Véronique Trillet-Lenoir. She's a member of the European Parliament of the Renew Europe party. Véronique, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe, Anna, you could remove your shared screen. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Good morning to all of you. I really want to thank the organizers for an important event and to launch their outstanding paper on the fair price of cancer medicines and medicines in general. As an oncologist, you can imagine how crucial the question is of fair pricing for cancer medicines to me. And as a shadow rapporteur on medicines shortages report in the ENVI committee, I have introduced the issue of fair price of medicines in the report. The subject is now back on the table. We need to develop our reflection and make concrete recommendations. For several years, I have dealt with the issue on a daily basis. For a medical doctor being forced to restrict access to patients for existing cancer medicines that could save or prolong their lives is unbearable, whatever the reason, and even more when it is a financial one. We need a European Union, including a European Union of medicines, affordable medicines for all those who need it. It is quite comfortable to speak after such bright panelists, because I would say that I have nothing to add, but maybe I would like to emphasize on 5 points that really appear crucial to me. The price of a drug should never, ever be based only on the sustainability of a national healthcare system. I agree with you, Loon, that it is a criteria. It should never be the unique one. And let me tell you that it is often the case. The price should rely, like any good, on the cost for the pharmaceutical firm and on the added benefit for the treated population. So amongst the recommendations made both in the ECL paper and also, I tell you, in the medicine shortage report, I would like to highlight transparency, proportional exclusivity, assessment, equity, and political will. This will be very quick, don't worry. Transparency, as already said, the cost calculation should exclude most of the time the early R&D phase, at least each time, that is very often, when it was supported by academics, themselves funded by public grants, as said by Sylvain, from governments. Governments who, by the way, never get the investment back in terms of money. On the contrary, they pay a second time when buying it. Think about it. Companies should, of course, all of you have said so, specify the parts financed by public resources, mention the tax advantages, subsidies, grants from which they have benefited. EMA should increase the number of audits to evaluate the respect of transparency by the pharmaceutical firms. My second point is proportionate exclusivity. The EU should actively fight against anti-competitive practices and promote access to the market and to the prescription of generics and biosimilars. The legislation on data exclusivity should be revised so that the granting of compulsory licenses could allow the marketing of generics or biosimilar in case of a health crisis such as the one we are experiencing, or to overcome the increasing price of specific treatments. My third point is assessment. It has been very much stressed and described by all panelists. The added benefit for the population is based on rigorous clinical evaluation. As shadow rapporteur on the HTF field, I can tell you, most of you know that the European Parliament and the European Commission are still trying to convince the Council, member state by member state, to adopt a common position in order to allow us to start the trilogue negotiations. And this convergence is the necessary prerequisite to install cooperation and harmonization in terms of price negotiations. A strong condition for my fourth point, equity between member states, meaning equity between European citizens. Last but not least, we need a stronger political will from the member states to agree on common criteria for decision-making, as reminded by Anne. They should allow the European Commission, dear Sylvain, to represent them as a negotiator under the framework currently developed via the COVAX action for the potential future anti-SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. I cannot develop, but I'm ready to answer the questions. By the way, this crisis has provided many opportunities to set up a European Union for health, and this type of common risk-taking strategy is a good example, and I'm awaiting for the reaction of the last speaker on this point. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate my commitment to contribute to equal access to affordable medicines, including cancer medicines, to all European citizens. In the framework of the EU for Health negotiations, Beating Cancer Committee and foreseen pharmaceutical strategy, as reminded by Sylvain, I will do my best to put the issue of fair price very high on the agenda, and you can rely on me. Thank you.
Thank you, Véronique, for the important comments you made. And then, of course, I think it's time to listen to the pharmaceutical industry and to René Imhoff of Roche. He's head of global pricing there, because, of course, we are very curious about his ideas about our recommendations.
Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to comment on the paper. The European Cancer League is really doing excellent work to advance cancer control and care, and we fully understand all the concerns which have been raised and discussed and raised by the previous speakers. I want to begin my response on the paper by saying how strongly we as Roche believe that closer collaboration is absolutely needed across the whole healthcare spectrum. It's critical to addressing all the cancer barriers so that we can improve access to these treatments moving forward. And today, most importantly, I also want to make it clear that we fully agree that in principle, a price should be fair, absolutely. And also we recognize that, of course, that access is not equal across the whole Europe. We know that, and we should all work that this is not the case in the future. We also recognize, of course, the budget challenges with all the products which are coming along the research and development pipeline, especially now also in this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Companies like ours should always behave socially responsible and, of course, ethically. That's absolutely critical for us too. So our own Roche pricing approach reflects actually the WHO fair pricing definition, and we have heard this before also from the WHO representative and also earlier. So it's a balance between affordability and incentives. Affordability for healthcare systems and patients across all countries, and also incentives to be able to deliver innovation for patients of tomorrow. So this is absolutely critical, and we believe that this is a fundamental principle we need to stick to in order to make sure that the innovation circle is also working in the future. Therefore, we firmly believe that prices of innovative medicines need to be based on the benefits they deliver to patients, the healthcare systems, and the broader society. Because only with such a pricing methodology, we can actually make sure that we can deliver innovation for patients of tomorrow, because this system delivers the incentives for industry to take important research and development risk and to go into areas of high unmet need, which is fundamental to be able to deliver true innovation. So on the paper itself, given the time allowed, let me make a couple of points here. Fundamentally, we believe that properly tackling barriers to access requires identifying the root causes. So the root causes are quite different, and they are different also country by country. It could be late diagnosis, it could be poor referral systems, it could be lack of infrastructure or affordability, especially in countries which do have less healthcare resources to tackle all those issues. So that's why we need comprehensive system-wide planning and collaboration to meet patient needs in each country. So it's an individual approach, country by country. And fair prices are part of that. So it's crucial that this is in place too. And I want to make that very clear. But medicine prices should not be looked at in isolation. There are broader barriers which need to be addressed. And as you know, there are vast economic disparities between EU member states and different methodologies for reimbursement and allocation of funds to health priorities. So in addressing all this, we firmly believe a differential pricing is absolutely critical in order to be able to address those barriers at an individual country perspective. But the transparency you are calling for in the paper presents some challenges for us. Although we are in principle supportive of broader transparency in healthcare, confidentiality, for instance, of prices gives us more scope to differentiate prices across countries. Without this in practice, increased price transparency would actually undermine industry's ability to provide differential prices due to unintended consequences. For instance, in terms of reference pricing, but also in terms of trade diversion, which would not be sustainable in the long run. So any effective policy response to these problems will require greater solidarity between member states, recognizing that national policy choices can and do have significant adverse effects in other member states. In this respect, certain international reference pricing and parallel importation rules and practices are of specific concern. And finally, two very important points you make. We agree that we have to, and Roche Thus, consider HTA requirements much earlier in the development process. We also agree that we have to focus our research on the areas of real unmet need for patients, and that is why we feel so strongly that the policy environment should support an innovation-driven pharmaceutical model to allow us to continue to invest year on year for the patients of tomorrow. I want to conclude by saying that we fully support the idea of a multi-stakeholder working group to focus on better access to innovation involving member states, representatives, the European Commission and EU institutions, industry, and of course other stakeholders. Individual member states and individual companies can do so much, but working together, we can find the right solutions for cancer patients throughout Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, René, for sharing your ideas with us. Then we have a last stakeholder, which is Sylvain Giraud of the DG Santé of the European Commission. And we would also like to hear his views on our recommendations. Sylvain, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, I'm still there, and I was listening carefully. I think I already spent probably too much time at the beginning telling you or giving you a certain idea of the direction that we want to take with the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe that is going to come. I found, of course, what you are saying resonates quite well with what you're saying in your paper, resonates quite well with some of the direction we are looking at. Also, I found very, very inspiring what was said by Véronique Trillet-Lenoir, and I think there's a lot of very good words of wisdom in what she said, and I think this is in a way what she said is a program in itself, a strategy in itself. So we will be looking for the support of the European Parliament and the MEPs that are so committed as she is in the further work and the cooperation we want to propose to the member states. Of course, the big challenge will be how willing, and she mentioned that herself, the political willingness, how willing will they be? How willing will they be able to see that solidarity, working together, actually brings benefits rather than going for a fragmented approach, which sometimes has been the policy of their choice. So it's a very challenging moment, I think, and all of us in our different roles, we have a role to play. What I've heard from the industry also shows that everyone is ready to contribute, and that we all feel that there is a moment of opportunities now for developing maybe a new approach. So that would be my comments at this stage. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sylvain. Then we are at the end of the session. Maybe we have some time left for 1 or 2 questions. I don't know if there are people who want to ask a question. Then you can raise your hand or type it in the chat. I think one question of Charlotte, maybe. Okay.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I'm Charlotte Roffian from an organization called France Asso Santé, which represents healthcare users in France. And I would like to congratulate ECL for this excellent work. And I've just a question, since the ENE report of the European Parliament on shortages has been mentioned several times. I would like to ask the panelists about the connection, the possible connection between shortages and the very high prices of new medicines. Because our impression is that there is a clear move of investments and money from one area, which is older medicines with low prices, and so which bring less money, obviously, to pharma companies, but which are obviously essential for cancer patients, to new medicines and so-called innovative medicines. So I would like to ask the panelists whether, in their opinion, there can also be a connection between the high prices of new medicines and the incredible increase of shortages of essential medicine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Who would like to answer that question? Maybe René? Okay.
Yeah, let me provide the perspective from Roche. I cannot talk about the whole industry here in this to give an answer on this, but we are, of course, working with all our affiliates in all the different countries to make sure that our products are available at every time throughout the whole product life cycle. So we are having all working very closely with them, because it's absolutely critical for us that our products are available to patients at every time. So of course there are situations where generics come on board later on in the life cycle of a product, but even in such situations we are working with our local stakeholders and affiliates to make sure the products are still available if there is a demand for these products in those markets.
Okay, thank you. And then Véronique Trillet-Lenoir also wanted to give a short comment to that question.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte, for this question. And since I know that we are to meet very soon, I won't be long, and I know that we will have this discussion together, but I can't agree more on your analysis. Of course, we have to see this switch, and I don't know what the issue and the solution is, because we need innovation, but we also need so-called old drugs. These drugs are not very much concerning the pharmaceutical firms, and this is understandable. As you may be aware of, the shortage files is proposing a public establishment to take the relay, and this we will be able to discuss together tomorrow, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. I think I would like to end the questions here and maybe give Anna the opportunity to present results of the vote before I wrap up. Anna, can you quickly show the results of the votes?
Yes, quickly sharing. So before wraps up, so we had 38 people. Well, let me read it to the first question. So we had 34 people answering the first question, which was out of the proposed recommendations, which ones are the most crucial. So we had the enhanced collaboration on horizon scanning, health technology assessment and pricing and reimbursement as #1. And the second was to ensure the transparent decision-making criteria. And the third was to attach conditionalities to public funding. And on the second poll, which was out of the recommendations for the pharmaceutical industry, which would be the most helpful for affordable medicines and fair pricing, say by far the first was to be transparent about the real prices and cost of R&D. And second and third was to include HTA and payer relevant criteria early in medicines development, and then steer R&D investment in the areas of high unmet need. So thank you so much to everyone who has voted. And Bart, over to you.
Okay, I'd like to say that if people have questions that have not been answered, they can send their questions to ECL, and then we will try to answer them, and maybe we will also send them to the panelists if they agree with that. Then maybe they can answer via email. Then what I still want to show you two slides. So the question, of course, now is where do we start? We have all these recommendations, and I think that we have 3 central recommendations, which are important to start with. Firstly, we think it's important to establish a high-level forum on medicines policy. This is an initiative that the European Commission should take and in which all the stakeholders are represented. And we had a discussion about fair price, fair pricing, and the advantages and disadvantages of the different models of fair price and fair pricing can take place. And what we also think is that it is very important that fair pricing and affordability is a priority in the EU Beating Cancer Plan and in the Pharmaceutical Strategy of the EU. And then finally, of course, I would ask everyone to read our recommendations for the EU Pharma Strategy and also to take them into account. So then I want to thank everyone who participated in this session. I especially want to thank Lode Bilde and Anna Prokupkova, because Lode did a lot of work to write the paper and Anna did a lot of work to edit the paper and to organize this session. I also want to thank the panelists to give a very clear and interesting presentation, and people who participated in the webinar. So I think we have come at the end of the session then. We will take all your comments into account and we will work further on this very important topic. So thank you and goodbye.